Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my May 2020 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. Is the concept of time wibbly-wobbly for anyone else right now? Because it feels like I'm working in a permanent brain fog and time just means nothing. As always, I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. In May, I read 20 things for a total of 5,721 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook pages 2 minutes, so about 1,987 of those pages were actually about 58 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 12 adult books, 7 YA books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 12 novels, 5 novellas, 2 graphic novels, and 1 webcomic. This month, my reading was all over the place, with fantasy and sci-fi taking the biggest chunks of the pie, followed by dystopian, romance, historical fiction, non-fiction, contemporary, and mystery thriller. If you adjust by page count, you can make a guess as to which genre the majority of the novellas were in. This month, only just over half of my books came from the library, which is wild, but I did manage to read some NetGalleys, some items free from the publisher, and something I borrowed from my new roommate. I read 12 ebooks, 6 audiobooks, 1 paperback book, and 1 webcomic. Almost half of these were in the 300 to 399 pages range, and the majority of them were published in the last decade. Nearly all of the authors were female, but the final 20% of the pie was split between men, non-binary folk, and books with multiple authors. As for the protagonist genders, more than half were female, and the non-binary protagonist was from the same series, so sadly that does not reflect multiple non-binary protagonists. In terms of the setting, most of the books took place in worlds other than our own, but I also had reads from the US, the UK, and Ireland. In terms of diversity, there was a decent mixture of it, although a quarter of what I read didn't feature any notable diversity. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 3-star read, 2 3.5-star reads, 7 4-star reads, 3 4.5-star reads, and 7 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated book and work our way up to the highest, shall we? And here's where I put the ever important disclaimer that a 3-star is not a bad rating. I tend to cater my reading to things I'm going to enjoy, so I very rarely give 1 or 2-star ratings because I don't make myself read 1 or 2-star books. Life's too short. My 3-star read was Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. This is a debut novel that just recently came out. It's also middle grade, and it features these 2 best friends who are trying to figure out what's going on in their town. One of them can also see ghosts specifically in her family, and it looks like her and her father might be losing their house, and if that happens, they might lose the ghosts too because they're tied to a tree in the yard. I thought this was a very fun middle grade adventure with some witchy elements, some ghost elements, some magic, some Latinx culture. It was pretty enjoyable. On to my 3.5-star reads. First we have No Country for Old Gnomes. This is the second in the Tales of Pell series. This is an incredibly pun-filled series, so if you don't like puns, you're not going to enjoy this series. However, some of the payoffs are just so good that I can't not enjoy reading these books. I don't know exactly what it was about this book that made me like it less than the first in the series, but I still very much enjoyed the adventure. Following different people this time, although people from the first book do come in at certain points to kind of tie the plot together, which I really appreciated. Essentially, this plot is all about this battle that is going on between halflings and gnomes. The gnomes are being forced out of their homes, and that's a travesty, and they're having a little bit of a hard time getting the king to help them out. There's also a couple of other little questing elements. I think that maybe I liked this one less than the first one because this one has to do with a war, and just overall that's not my favorite thing to read about, and maybe that's why I didn't like it as much. Who knows? I'm fickle. My other 3.5-star read was The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. This is a female-female romance that takes place somewhere in the past in England. I didn't check which decade it is. Lucy's father was an astronomer, but he has recently died, and for the past few years she's been doing all of his math for him, so she is pretty much an astronomer too. Unfortunately, her long-term girlfriend has just decided to up and marry a man, because that's what you're supposed to do in this day and age, I guess, but didn't even consult her about it before doing it. So Lucy is grieving and heartbroken and receives this letter from a countess who she's talked to before in correspondence because of her father's work, looking for somebody who will translate this text from French. Lucy thinks that she can do it, so she hightails it down to London to say, hey, I want this gig. When she gets there, she finds Catherine the Countess, who is also a widow and is also smoking hot. This was a lovely mixture of science and art, and one of these people realizing that she likes women, which was just lovely. Some very steamy old-timey sex scenes as well. well. Unlike a lot of period pieces, this didn't have a section about outing the sexuality of the characters, which was refreshing. It did have a lot to say about women in STEM and men constantly taking women's ideas and passing them off as their own because they are the more legitimate people at this time frame. This could have just been fluff, but it also had substance, which is kind of my favorite romance. Moving on to my 4-star reads, first I want to talk about the audiobook adaptation of the graphic novel Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. How do you adapt a graphic novel into an audiobook? Full cast, that's how. Although I've seen it around and although I've been interested, I've never actually read this graphic novel, but now I feel like I have. I've seen the characters before because I've seen the cover many, many times, so I was able to mostly picture these characters talking in my ears, which was very fun. This book is about a girl named Nimona who decides she wants to be the sidekick to this bad guy, so basically just shows up and says, hey, I'm your sidekick. Also, I'm a shapeshifter. You could probably use that for your nefarious schemes. As the book goes on, you tend to realize that the bad guy isn't really the bad guy and that who's running the show might actually be the bad guy, and it's one of those tales. It's a lot of fun. If you like audiobooks and you like full cast narrations, this one is a good one. It's also very short. It was only about a couple of hours. Next we have Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is my mystery thriller for the month, and this one I've seen all over booktube, so if you haven't already heard about it, I would be kind of surprised at this point. This one is about a girl who is kind of down on her luck because on the same day she was laid off from her job, she came home early to find her boyfriend cheating on her, so she now doesn't have a job, a boyfriend, or an apartment. She finds this listing online for an apartment sitter. Basically, this very fancy building downtown isn't allowed to have apartments open for more than 3 months at a time because of some co-op rule, and they will actually pay people to stay in these very fancy apartments. However, there are a lot of strict rules, like you're not allowed to have friends over and you have to always sleep in the apartment, but you get paid $4 grand a month, so why wouldn't somebody jump at this chance? However, when she gets there, as you might guess considering it's a mystery thriller, some weird things start to happen. What I really appreciated about this is this used red herrings very, very well. It made you think it was going in one type of direction as to what was going on, and then it completely turned, which was very nice. There were a couple of things about the plot that I found predictable, but I was also surprised a few times. I also found it very funny that I was reading this book about this girl who has to stay in an apartment while I have to stay indoors because quarantine, although she's actually allowed to leave the apartment. I mean, technically I'm also allowed to leave the house, but it's basically just to go to the grocery store. I have 5 more 4-star reads for this list, but they are all in the same series. I did a reread of All Systems Red and Artificial Condition, then I moved on to Rogue Protocol, Exit Strategy, and Network Effect, all by Martha Wells. These are the 5 books that are published so far in the Murderbot Diaries series, and I did a whole reading vlog where I read all of these books in about 4 days just before Network Effect came out, so I'm going to link that. It was quite a ride. The first 4 books in this series are novellas, and then the last one is the first full-length novel that we've gotten in this series, and it was so good. Basically, my only big problem with this series up until that point is I always wanted more, but there wasn't enough time in novellas to give me more. That's not what a novella is. With this full-length novel, we really got to interact with these characters, and I loved everything about it. If you're not aware of this series, the main character is Murderbot, or at least that's what they call themselves in their head. They are a security robot, and essentially they've hacked their governor module so they can basically do whatever they want, and what they do most of the time when they're not working is just watch their stories, which is so relatable. At one point in their past, before they hacked their software, they had been used for this mass murder, and they kind of have some feelings about that, and they want to know about that, and this whole series is just so good. Since 4 of these books are sequels, I'm not going to talk about them individually because that doesn't make any sense from a spoiler standpoint. However, if you do want to see me reading through the books and getting more of my initial reactions, again, I do have that entire reading vlog. That is also non-spoilery, so I'm not going to ruin plots for you in that one as well, but you get a lot more of my eloquent in-the-moment feelings about these things, such as how much I love the interaction between Murderbot and Art. Just wonderful. But that, for example, means nothing to someone who hasn't read at least the second novella. It's a great series. Murderbot is incredibly capable, but full of anxiety and also just wants to watch their stories and is so, so relatable. On to my 4.5-star reads, the first one being Can't Escape Love, which is a Reluctant Royals novella. I didn't realize there were 2 novellas in this series. I first started this series with the first novella, which is 2.5 in the series, which is Once Ghosted, Twice Shy, which is about these 2 kind of side characters, hence why it's a novella in the series. And after reading that, I went back to the beginning, read the first book, waited for a while to read the second book until I realized it was set in my favorite city, which is Edinburgh, Scotland, and it's set in an armory, which I love swords. I have a friend who owns an armory. Why didn't I read this book quicker? And then I read the third book in the series and then realized that there was another novella. So I jumped on that. This novella centers Reggie, who is Portia's twin sister. So if you've read this series, you might know who Portia is. She's the lead in the second book. She runs this website called Girl with Glasses. It's all about nerdy content. It has blown up over the time and she is basically living her best life. And she finds herself in this strange predicament because she's having insomnia, and usually when she has insomnia she goes online and just watches these live streams that she used to watch all the time of this guy just doing puzzles. And she really just liked his voice and it would lull her to sleep. Unfortunately, those live streams have been taken down, so now she's forced to contact this person and ask for recordings of his voice. This was a delightful exploration of friends to lovers. It also has to do with disability because she is a wheelchair user and he is autistic. And I just wanted more from this novella. Unfortunately, it doesn't really fit the Reluctant Royals kind of main series because neither one of them is royal, but I'm so glad that we got this novella. Next we have the Henna Wars, which is another debut novel that recently came out. This one is about a Bangladeshi girl whose family has moved to Ireland, and at the beginning of the book she's formulating the plan to finally come out as a lesbian to her parents. This unfortunately doesn't go great. It doesn't go terribly, but they weren't exactly pleased and didn't exactly believe her. Right after this, she goes to a wedding of a family friend and reconnects with this girl she used to go to school with when she was much younger and had a crush on. It turns out when the school year starts back up, they're in the same business class and they decide that they're both going to create henna businesses. Unfortunately, henna is part of our main character's culture and not part of the culture of the girl she has a crush on. This book has discussions of homophobia, xenophobia, racism, as well as cultural appropriation. I also, because I used to live in Dublin, liked this one section where I talked about how the buses are terrible. They are never on time, and some things never change because they were not on time a decade ago either. This was a sweet exploration of all of these formative topics in this character's life, and I cannot highly recommend it enough. My last 4.5-star read is a queer historical murder mystery, and that's The Boy in the Red Dress. I heard about this book during one of the reading sessions of Quarantine Pages, which if you haven't heard of this project yet, I will link the Instagram down below, and from there you can see how to get involved. Basically, it's a bunch of us that get together at a certain time every day of the week, and we read together over Zoom and then talk about what we've been reading. Occasionally they also have author interviews, so the author of this book actually came on the channel and talked about her book the day after it was released and what it's like to be a debut novelist during quarantine, and it was fantastic. That is also available online as well. So it's New Year's Eve, 1929 in New Orleans, and Millie is working in her aunt's underground speakeasy that is for queer folk, which right there, if that's not enough to get you to read this book, just continue to listen because it gets even better from there. She's bisexual and her best friend is the club's drag queen. She's working the door that night and somebody comes in looking for her best friend, and she basically says, I'm not going to tell you anything about this because they've been instructed not to tell anybody's business here because obviously many illegal things are happening here. Unfortunately, the person that was looking for her best friend ends up dead that night, and people think that her best friend did it. This had so many twists and turns and red herrings, and I really love that about it, and it was like that because the author actually rewrote it like 6 times, changing who the murderer was. And you can tell because there's so many times where I'm like, oh, it has to be this person, no, it has to be this person. And you're just ping-ponging all over the place trying to follow the evidence, and it's just wonderful. In the middle of this, Millie also has a crush on one of the girls that works at the club, as well as a boy who provides the liquor, so you know, that's a wonderful love triangle. This book gave me luscious, sultry, noir film vibes, and you should just read it. We're on to my 5-star reads for the month, and the first 3 are actually all in the same series, and they're all rereads. Anytime I reread 5-star books, I always put them at the beginning of my 5 stars because I want to give a chance for new things to be my best for the month. So these first 3 books are The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. You might think that I specifically read these because that prequel book came out recently, and that's really not the reason. I just thought to myself, you know what? I haven't actually read these in a very long time. I should read them again. And then I found out that there was a prequel book, which I'm gonna read eventually. I have a hold on it from the library. It's gonna take like 4 months before it's my turn, but did anyone ask for a President Snow prequel? Because I didn't. And I'm weirdly jaded about this. I really hope that the author just really wrote it because she wanted to write it and not for a cash grab. But it's one of those books that is a great topic of conversation in the booktube world, so I feel like I'm going to have to read it to be part of the conversation because FOMO is real. In any case, I'm not going to talk about individual plots. I'm sure you've heard of the Hunger Games before. Basically, it's a big dystopian where there are 12 different sections of what used to be North America. It's now called Pan Am. And every year, every district has to send one girl and one boy to fight to the death in the Hunger Games. What I can say about this is these books really stood the test of time. I thought I was going to go back and be like, oh, this isn't as great as I remembered it, because that happens a lot with books that I've read from a decade ago. But no, this really held up, and I gave them 5 stars again. I have 2 little interesting tidbits about reading these. Firstly, I wanted to reread this series because earlier this year I read The Dark Fantastic, which is all about POC characters in fantasy worlds, and this series came up heavily in that discussion, so I wanted to get back to it. Secondly, it turned out when I was putting holds on the audiobooks, I realized that there was the original audiobooks and then there were 10-year anniversary audiobooks, and for whatever reason I just assumed that basically these copies were the same and there would be a little bit of bonus content in the 10-year anniversary ones. And basically I just picked which copy to put a hold on based on when I would get it sooner so I could read them in order kind of all at the same time. So for the Hunger Games I had the 10th anniversary, and for the other 2 I had the original, and I kind of wish that I had the 10th anniversary for all of them because those ones are narrated by Tatiana Maslany, who I know and love from Orphan Black. She plays about half the characters on that show and she's amazing. And don't get me wrong, the other narrator is perfectly fine. However, once you've listened to Tatiana Maslany and then you go over to this other narrator who has a significantly older voice, it's just not the same. I hate listening to series and having a different narrator partway through. It's just not what I love. But Tatiana Maslany, yes. Then onto the only physical book I read this entire month, which is just so freaking weird to me. I read The Adventure Zone, Here There Be Gerblins. This is a graphic novel adaptation of the podcast The Adventure Zone, their very first campaign from my understanding. This is a podcast where 3 brothers and their dad play D&D together, and it's really delightful. I've to this day still never listened to a McElroy podcast, which is ridiculous because there's like 12 of them, but I have been in the same room as them because I went to PodCon and I went to PodCon 2 and they are co-founders of that. If you like D&D or if you just like adventure fantasy stories, you're going to enjoy this. It's just very funny, very witty, and very enjoyable. Next we have Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a YA fantasy about this utopian society where all of the bad people have basically been weeded out. Our main character is Jam. She is a transgender girl. Her mom is an artist, and one day her mom creates this painting that is something a little bit more than just art. Here's the thing, I didn't know anything about this book going into it besides the main character was trans and a black girl. That's all I knew about it going into it, and that's kind of all I want you to know as well, besides you should read it, because this has such interesting discussions about good versus evil and how to figure out if something is wrong, and also comes with trigger warnings for abuse of minors. The fantastical element was just done in such an interesting way, and it's something I've never really seen before. And even in itself, it plays up the concept of angels versus demons and what that means. The writing was absolutely beautiful. It makes me want to read Freshwater even more, and I can't believe I haven't gotten to it, but one day I will. And with everything in the latter half of this video, you should just go read it. The penultimate item on this list is The Five, The Untold Stories of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. The title says it all. This is a biography of the 5 women who were killed by Jack the Ripper, allegedly, because we don't know who he was. And this book doesn't focus on him. This book is not about him. This book is about them. This book really shines a light on the systemic reasons why all these women were so vulnerable and why they were in a place where they could just be murdered by this madman. But even though that is the biggest thing they have in common, and that's what they are known for, we got to learn about everything from their early lives all the way up until their demise. Something that's not often portrayed when we talk about Jack the Ripper is how 4 out of 5 of these women were in their 40s when they were killed. Additionally, the media at the time painted all of them as sex workers, and because they were sex workers, obviously they deserved what happened to them, which is just false. Sex work is legitimate work. It does not make you less of a person. It does not mean that people should be able to harm you and everybody should be fine with it. Additionally, there was little to no evidence that 4 out of 5 of these women were involved in sex work. This book was absolutely fascinating and such an interesting spin on true crime, and I cannot highly recommend it enough. My favorite item for the month, the top of my 5 stars, might be a little bit controversial because it's not actually a book. However, if this masterpiece was ever translated to the page, you better believe that I would be buying it immediately. This, of course, is the webcomic that I completely read every single issue of so far this month, which is Lore Olympus. This is a Hades Persephone retelling with the most beautiful art I've ever seen in a webcomic. Hades, of course, is the king of the underworld. He works very hard at his job, and he's been around the block for about the last 2,000 years. His brother Zeus makes him come out to a party one night, and he hates going to these parties because his brother is married and happy and all of that jazz. And Hades has this girlfriend, but she is just a giant bitch and decides she doesn't want to come that night, so she doesn't, so he's there alone. From across the room, Hades sees this girl he's never seen before and makes the mistake of saying that she puts Aphrodite to shame, and Aphrodite does not take kindly to this. Aphrodite is pretty vindictive and creates a plot to basically embarrass this girl who you might have figured out is Persephone. Persephone, in this context, is 19 years old. She grew up in the mortal realm, but she has come back to Olympus to basically go to college. And these two characters strike up a very unlikely friendship that everyone reading wants it to be a little bit more. However, there is this huge age difference. He doesn't know what his feelings mean. She doesn't know what her feelings mean because she's never had a boyfriend before. She's supposed to be a virgin for life because that's what her mother wants for her. And then, of course, he has this girlfriend, so they can't get together if they wanted to, because neither one of them wants to be cheaters. This webcomic was recommended to me at least 2 years ago, and I've had the tab open on my computer since then, and finally got around to reading it. And I am so excited that I waited, because if I had had to read some of these things week to week to week, oh my goodness. It is still ongoing though, so now every Sunday I'm gonna have to read Lore Olympus because I love it so much. However, I'm really glad that I didn't have to wait literal years for episode 110, because for anyone who is also a fan of Lore Olympus, it made me so happy. The series does have trigger warnings for sexual assault, but every episode that deals with that, it has a trigger warning at the beginning of the comic, so you can easily skip that section if you need to. I'm looking forward to adding more webcomics to my reading because they are legitimate reading. Just because they're not printed in a book format does not make them less worthy of my time. If you'd like to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. Some of you have asked if there is a way to support me, so I recently set up a coffee count, so that is also linked down below, as well as my Amazon wish list. If you've read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you're on your keyboard. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!